Legendary is the only word that ever felt big enough for the way Liam Neeson speaks when he finally opens his mouth about Rob Reiner, his voice trembling as if the truth itself is too heavy to carry, as if a lifetime of silence is breaking open all at once and spilling into the quiet of a dimly lit room where memories refuse to stay buried. Liam sits there in the soft glow of a single lamp, his hands folded, knuckles white, eyes wet but unblinking. And he tells us this story as if he's afraid, that if he looks away for even a second, the ghost will disappear before he can finally let them speak. He says people think they know Rob Reiner. They think they know the films, the laughter, the bold public persona, the legendary friendships with actors like Jack Nicholson, Tom Cruise, and Meryl Streep. But he says what the world never saw was the weight Rob carried, the illness that slowly hollowed him out, and the secret that gnawed at him in those final days like a wound that never healed. This is a fictionalized account, Liam quietly admits, a story told in the language of truth even when the facts belong to another world, but the emotions, he says, those are real enough to shatter a heart. Liam remembers the first time he saw Rob after the diagnosis, how the man who once filled rooms with booming laughter now seemed smaller, as if the walls themselves were leaning in on him. Rob joked, of course, because that was his armor, but his eyes told a different story. They were tired. They were afraid. And beneath all that, there was something darker, something unspoken that Liam felt pressing against every word Rob tried not to say. They would sit together late into the night, the television flickering with old movies, Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn ghosts dancing across the screen, while Rob's breathing grew more labored and his hand shook just enough to betray how moo. He was fighting to stay strong. Liam says Rob talked a lot about family in those weeks, about his children, about the people he had loved and hurt along the way. He spoke about his friendships with Billy Crystal and Nora Ephron, about how they had once believed they would live forever because Hollywood had made them feel untouchable. But illness has a way of stripping away that illusion, and Rob knew it. He knew his time was slipping through his fingers, and with every passing day, the words he was holding back grew heavier, more urgent, more dangerous. Liam could feel in the pauses, in the way Rob would start a sentence and then stop, as if the truth was too sharp to let out without cutting them both. There was one night, Liam says, when the pain was so bad that Rob could barely sit up. A nurse had just left, and the room was quiet except for the hum of machines and the distant city sounds outside the window. Rob looked at Liam with a kind of raw desperation he had never shown before, and in that moment, the legendary director seemed less like a giant of Hollywood and more like a frightened man standing at the edge of something he could not escape. He whispered that there were things he had done, things he had allowed, secrets buried under years of success and applause, and that if he died without saying them, they would rot inside him forever. Liam felt his own chest tighten as Rob spoke because he realized this was not just about regret. It was about guilt. It was about a truth that could shatter reputations, break families, and rewrite everything people thought they knew about the golden age of Hollywood. Rob mentioned names in hushed tones, people like a young actor who never got his chance, a producer who pulled strings in the shadows, and a powerful studio head whose smile hid 1,000 sins. The way Rob said those names made Liam's blood run cold, because it sounded less like gossip and more like a confession that had been waiting decades to be heard. As the night dragged on, Rob grew weaker, but his need to speak grew stronger. He told Liam about promises he had broken, about deals he had made to protect people he loved, even when it meant sacrificing others. He spoke about a film that never got made because it would have exposed too much, about letters he had burned and recordings he had destroyed, all in the name of keeping the fragile piece of Hollywood intact. Liam listened, feeling both honored and terrified to be the one holding these words, knowing that once they were spoken, they could never truly be taken back. When dawn finally crept through the curtains, Rob's voice was barely more than a whisper, but his eyes were clearer than Liam had ever seen them. He said there was one last thing, something that tied all the secrets together, something that would explain why he had lived with so much pain beneath all that laughter. He reached for Liam's hand, gripping it with surprising strength. And for a moment, it felt like the whole world had narrowed down to that single fragile connection between two men at the edge of goodbye. Liam pauses here when he tells the story, his own breath catching, as if he is right back in that room, right back in the shadow of Rob's final days. And you can feel that whatever came next was not just a revelation, but a wound that never stopped bleeding. Beloved is how Liam Neeson still describes Rob when he lets the next memory rise up from the depths of his chest, even though the word now tastes bittersweet on his tongue, because what followed that night changed the way he sees everything. Rob's hand was still wrapped around his, warm but trembling, and the machines beside the bed clicked and hummed as if they were counting down the seconds of life that had already given so much to the world and yet still felt unbearably unfinished. Rob leaned closer, his breath shallow, and Liam remembers feeling both anger and sorrow as he listened. He wanted to shout, to demand why Rob had waited so long, but instead he just held his hand tighter because he could see how much the confession was costing him. Rob said his illness had stripped away the last of his defenses. The doctors told him he did not have long, and suddenly the secrets he had buried felt heavier than the pain in his own body. He said he could not leave this world without at least one person knowing the truth, even if that truth never made it into the headlines. There were tears in Rob's eyes as he talked about his family, about how his children had grown up idolizing him, unaware of the darkness he carried. He said he feared that if they ever found out, they would hate him, and that fear had kept him silent for years. Yet now, as death loomed closer, the idea of taking that secret to the grave felt even more unbearable. He asked Liam if redemption was still possible, if telling one person was enough to make a difference, or if he had waited too long to be forgiven. Liam says he did not know how to answer. All he could do was listen as Rob continued, describing how other famous faces had been caught in the web of that long-ago night, how some had tried to speak up and were crushed, while others had chosen comfort over conscience. He mentioned how a young director once tried to expose the truth and suddenly found his projects canceled, his name quietly disappearing from studio lists. The machine of Hollywood, Rob said, was very good at protecting itself. As the morning light grew stronger, Rob's energy began to fade, but his need to confess did not. He told Liam there was something even worse, something he had never told anyone, something that explained why he had lived with so much fear and regret all these years. His voice dropped to a whisper, and in that whisper was a promise that the next words would change everything Liam thought he knew about Rob Reiner. The room felt impossibly still as Rob prepared to speak, as if even the air itself was holding its breath, and Liam knew he was about to hear something that could never be unheard. Respected was the word Rob used to describe the man whose name he could barely bring himself to say, and when he finally did, it came out like a wound being torn open all over again. Liam says he had to lean closer to catch it, because Rob's voice was fading, but the weight of what he said felt like it could shake the walls. Rob confessed that the powerful mogul who had offered him protection all those years ago was someone the world adored, a figure who sat at award shows beside actors like Tom Hanks and Julia Roberts, smiling for cameras while quietly pulling strings behind the scenes. Rob had known what that man was capable of, and yet he had taken the deal anyway, choosing success over justice in a moment that haunted him every single day afterward. He told Liam that after that night on the soundstage, the young actor who tried to intervene was blacklisted almost immediately. His auditions dried up, his phone stopped ringing, and within a year he had left Los Angeles entirely, his dreams shattered by forces he could not fight. Rob said he still kept an old photograph of that young man in a drawer, a reminder of the life he had helped destroy through his silence. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Rob would take it out and stare at it, wondering what might have been if he had been brave enough to speak. As Rob talked, tears slipped down his cheeks, and Liam could feel how deeply the shame had carved itself into his soul. He said there were moments when he tried to tell his wife, when the words rose up in his throat and then died there, because he could not bear to see the disappointment in her eyes. He said he had built a career on telling stories about honesty and human connection, all while hiding a truth that made him feel like a fraud. The irony, he admitted, was almost too much to live with. Rob also spoke about the pressure from other Hollywood figures, how some of them had quietly encouraged him to keep quiet, reminding him of everything he stood to lose. He mentioned a late-night call from a famous producer who warned him that if he ever said a word, his family would pay the price. Those threats had stayed with him, feeding his fear and convincing him that silence was the only way to survive in an industry that could be both dazzling and cruel. Liam says he felt his own heart break as Rob described the years of therapy, the sleepless nights, the constant feeling that he was being watched. Even at premieres and award shows, Rob would scan the room, wondering who knew and who might be waiting for him to slip up. The fame that once felt like a blessing had slowly turned into a prison, one built out of secrets and half-truths. When Rob paused to catch his breath, Liam asked him why he was telling him now. Rob smiled weakly and said that illness has a way of stripping away all the lies you tell yourself. When the doctors said there was nothing more they could do, he realized that all the money, all the accolades, all the power in the world could not protect him from the one thing he had been running from his entire life, his own conscience. He said he wanted at least one person to know who he really was before he died. Not the legend, not the director, but the flawed, frightened man beneath it all. There was a moment of silence after that, heavy and sacred, and then Rob leaned in again, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. He told Liam that what he was about to say next was the most dangerous truth of all, the one that connected everything and explained why he had never been able to let go of his guilt. His grip tightened on Liam's hand, and in that tightening was a desperate plea to be heard, to be remembered, and maybe, just maybe, to be forgiven. Legendary is how Liam Neeson still thinks of the way Rob found the strength to speak those next words, even as his body was failing him, even as every breath felt like it might be his last. Rob told him that the most dangerous truth was not just about what he had seen, but about what he had done afterward. He confessed that years after the incident, when the young actress had tried to come forward, Rob had been asked to intervene to quietly persuade her to stay silent in exchange for a settlement that would make her comfortable but never whole. He had told himself he was helping her survive in a ruthless industry, but deep down he knew he was helping the machine erase her story. Liam felt a knot tighten in his stomach as Rob described sitting across from her in a quiet restaurant, watching her hands shake as she spoke about the trauma that still haunted her. Rob said he had promised to protect her, even as he was convincing her to sign away her voice. He said he still saw her face in his dreams, the mixture of hope and resignation in her eyes as she realized that justice was not something Hollywood was willing to give. That memory, Rob admitted, had been more painful than any physical illness he had ever endured. He went on to say that the powerful mogul had rewarded him handsomely for his loyalty. Bigger projects, more creative control, doors opening that might otherwise have stayed shut. From the outside, it looked like the natural rise of a talented director, but Rob knew the truth. Every success was built on a compromise. Every standing ovation echoed with the silence of those who had been pushed aside. He spoke about attending a gala with stars like George Clooney and Nicole Kidman, smiling for cameras while feeling like a ghost at his own celebration. That Rob's voice grew weaker as he talked about how the guilt had seeped into every corner of his life. He became distant from his family, afraid that if they looked too closely, they would see the rot beneath the surface. He said there were times when he thought about confessing publicly, about blowing the whole thing open, but then he would picture his children's faces, the way they looked at him with pride, and he would lose his nerve. Fear, he said, is a powerful jailer. Liam remembers asking him if he regretted it all, and Rob did not hesitate. He said yes in a voice so full of pain that it was almost a cry. He regretted not being braver, not being kinder, not being the man he pretended to be in his movies. He said the illness had given him one strange gift, the chance to finally stop lying, even if it was only to one person in a quiet room at the end of his life. There was a long pause after that, broken only by the soft beeping of the machines. Rob closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering the last of his strength, and when he opened them again, there was a clarity there that Liam would never forget. He said there was one final thing he needed to say, something that would explain why he had chosen Liam of all people to hear this confession. He whispered that it was not an accident that Liam was there, that their paths had crossed for a reason that went back further than either of them realized. The air felt thick with anticipation as Rob leaned closer, his breath shallow but his resolve unshakable, and Liam knew that the next words would reveal a connection so personal and so painful that it would change the meaning of everything that had come before. Beloved was the look in Rob's eyes when he finally told Liam why it had to be him, why this confession could not be trusted to anyone else in Hollywood's glittering, treacherous circle. Rob said that years ago, long before Liam was the global icon he would become, there had been a small independent film, a quiet project that barely anyone remembers now. In that film, a young Time assistant had confided in Rob about the same mogul, about the same dark patterns of power and fear. That assistant, Rob whispered, had been someone Liam loved, someone whose life had been bent in ways that were never fully healed. Liam says his breath left his body when he realized what Rob was implying. The room seemed to tilt as memories he had buried surged back to the surface. Fragments of late-night phone calls, sudden career changes, a sadness in someone's eyes that had never quite gone away. Rob told him he had known the truth back then and had done nothing, that he had watched Liam build a life and a family while carrying a wound that had been quietly inflicted by the same system Rob had helped protect. The guilt of that, he said, was what finally broke him. Rob began to cry, not the dignified tears of a public figure, but the raw, shaking sobs of a man who had waited too long to say he was sorry. He told Liam that every time he saw him on screen, strong and resilient, it reminded him of his own cowardice. He said he had wanted to reach out, to confess, but he was afraid of reopening old scars and of losing the fragile peace he had built around his family. Now, with death so close, he could no longer live with that silence. Liam remembers feeling a storm of emotions, anger, grief, disbelief, all crashing together in his chest. He wanted to demand answers, to know every detail, but Rob was fading fast, his words coming slower, softer. He apologized over and over, saying he wished he could go back, that he wished he had been the man his movies pretended he was. He said he knew an apology could never undo the harm, but he hoped that truth, even spoken this late, might offer some small measure of peace. The machines beside the bed grew louder, more urgent, and Rob squeezed Liam's hand one last time. He said there was a letter hidden in a safe, that Kanta. In names, dates, everything he had been too afraid to say out loud. He begged Liam to find it, not to expose the world necessarily, but to give the victims something he had denied them for so long, acknowledgement. His eyes searched Liam's face as if asking for forgiveness he did not feel he deserved. The room filled with nurses, and the moment slipped away. Liam could barely process what he had just heard. Rob's final words were not about his films or his fame, but about the people he had failed, and in those words was a sorrow, so deep it felt like it might swallow everything else. Liam's voice trembles as he recounts this, and you can feel that the weight of Rob's secret did not die with him. It followed Liam out of that hospital room, into every quiet moment since, waiting to be understood. Beloved was the look in Rob's eyes when he finally told Liam why it had to be him, why this confession could not be trusted to anyone else in Hollywood's glittering, treacherous circle. Rob said that years ago, long before Liam was the global icon he would become, there had been a small independent film, a quiet project that barely anyone remembers now. In that film, a young production assistant had confided in Rob about the same mogul, about the same dark patterns of power and fear. That assistant, Rob whispered, had been someone Liam loved, someone whose life had been bent in ways that were never fully healed. Liam says his breath left his body when he realized what Rob was implying. The room seemed to tilt as memories he had buried surged back to the surface. Fragments of late-night phone calls, sudden career changes, a sadness in someone's eyes that had never quite gone away. Rob told him he had known the truth back then and had done nothing, that he had watched Liam build a life and a family while carrying a wound that had been quietly inflicted by the same system Rob had helped protect. The guilt of that, he said, was what finally broke him. Rob began to cry, not the dignified tears of a public figure, but the raw, shaking sobs of a man who had waited too long to say he was sorry. He told Liam that every time he saw him on screen, strong and resilient, it reminded him of his own cowardice. He said he had wanted to reach out, to confess, but he was afraid of reopening old scars and of losing the fragile peace he had built around his family. Now, with death so close, he could no longer live with that silence. Liam remembers feeling a storm of emotions, anger, grief, disbelief, all crashing together in his chest. He wanted to demand answers, to know every detail, but Rob was fading fast, his words coming slower, softer. He apologized over and over, saying he wished he could go back, that he wished he had been the man his movies pretended he was. He said he knew an apology could never undo the harm, but he hoped that truth, even spoken this late, might offer some small measure of peace. The machines beside the bed grew louder, more urgent, and Rob squeezed Liam's hand one last time. He said there was a letter, hidden in a safe, that contained names, dates, everything he had been too afraid to say out loud. He begged Liam to find it, not to expose the world necessarily, but to give the victims something he had denied them for so long, acknowledgement. His eyes searched Liam's face as if asking for forgiveness he did not feel he deserved. They essed the room, filled with nurses, and the moment slipped away. Liam could barely process what he had just heard. Rob's final words were not about his films or his fame, but about the people he had failed. And in those words was a sorrow so deep it felt like it might swallow everything else that Liam's voice trembles as he recounts this. And you can feel that the weight of Rob's secret did not die with him. It followed Liam out of that hospital room, into every quiet moment since, waiting to be understood. Legendary is how Liam Neeson describes the silence that fell after Rob Reiner's last breath. A silence so heavy it felt like the world itself had stopped to listen to what had just been lost. He says he stood there for a long time, unable to move, staring at a man who had been both a giant of Hollywood and a prisoner of his own secrets. The nurses eventually guided him out, but the words Rob had spoken stayed lodged in his chest, echoing with every step down the hospital hallway, with every door that closed behind him. In the days that followed, Liam tried to return to his life, to his work, to the familiar rhythm of sets and scripts, but nothing felt the same. Every smile from a producer, every handshake from a studio executive now carried a shadow, because he could not unhear what Rob had told him about the machine that had chewed up so many lives. He found himself thinking about the young actor who had been erased, about the woman who had signed away her voice, about the countless others whose stories would never be told. It was like walking through a city built on invisible graves. Liam did what Rob had asked. He tracked down the safe, the quiet little box tucked away in a place only Rob and one trusted lawyer had known. Inside were letters, old emails, handwritten notes filled with regret and fear. Names leapt off the pages, some famous, some forgotten, all connected by a web of power and silence that stretched back decades. Reading them felt like peering into a wound that Hollywood had carefully covered with glitter and applause. He did not know what to do with it all. Part of him wanted to release everything, to let the world see the truth no matter how ugly it was. Another part of him thought about Rob's family, about the children who had loved their father, and about the victims who might not want their pain turned into headlines. The weight of that decisio, it nearly crushed him. There were nights when he would sit alone, holding those papers, feeling like he was carrying not just Rob's secret, but the burden of an entire broken system. Liam says he began to notice how many people in Hollywood carried that same haunted look, how many famous faces seemed to flinch when certain names were mentioned. It made him wonder how many Rob Reiners there were, how many people had made terrible choices and then lived with them in silence, protected by money and fear. The realization left him both angry and deeply sad, because it meant the problem was bigger than any one man. Even now, as he tells this story, Liam's eyes fill with tears. He says he does not know if he did the right thing by keeping Rob's last words private for so long, or if silence, once again, became a kind of betrayal. All he knows is that a dying man trusted him with his truth, And that truth has never let him go. That he looks straight into the camera at the end of this part of his confession, his voice low and heavy, and says that some stories do not end when a person dies. Some of them keep breathing, waiting for the moment when someone finally decides to let them live in the light. Legendary is the ache that still lives in Liam Neeson's chest as he finally allows himself to speak the last pieces of what Rob Reiner left behind. Because some truths do not belong to the past. They belong to the wounds we carry into the future. He says he never released the letters, never called a journalist, never tried to turn Rob's confession into a spectacle, because he realized something in the months after Rob's death that frightened him more than any villain he had ever played. The system Rob had described was still there, still quiet, still powerful, and exposing it would not only tear down reputations, it would rip open the lives of people who had already suffered too much. Liam says he reached out privately instead. He found the woman Rob had spoken about, now older, still carrying a sadness in her eyes that no amount of success could erase. He told her what Rob had said, how deeply he had regretted what he had done, and for the first time, she cried not from pain, but from being believed. He also tried to find the young actor who had been pushed out, but the trail went cold, as if that man had vanished into a world that never wanted him back. That loss, Liam says, will always feel like a ghost walking beside him. Rob's family eventually learned that there had been secrets, though not every detail. Liam says he watched them struggle with the idea that the man they loved was both kind and flawed, both generous and deeply broken. There is no easy way to hold those two truths at once, and yet that is what being human demands. Rob was not a monster, Liam insists, but he was not a hero either. He was a man who made a terrible choice and then spent the rest of his life paying for it in ways the world never SAW'd in quiet moments. Liam still hears Rob's voice, still feels the grip of his hand in that hospital room, still sees the look in his eyes when he asked for forgiveness he did not think he deserved. Liam does not know if forgiveness was ever truly possible, but he knows that confession mattered. It mattered because silence is what allows darkness to grow, and even a single whisper of truth can crack it open. That he ends by saying that Hollywood is built on stories, and not all of them are pretty. Some are painful, some are ugly, some are soaked in regret. But if we only tell the beautiful ones, we will never understand the cost of the dreams we celebrate. Rob Reiner's last words were not meant to destroy. Liam says they were meant to be a warning, a reminder that even legends are human, and even humans must one day face what they have done. And as the light fades and Liam's voice grows soft, there's a lingering feeling that Rob's secret is not really gone, that it lives on in every unanswered question and every quiet ache, waiting for the world to be brave enough to listen.